Picture, if you will, a good old-fashioned Western standoff.
A duel?
If it's Western, is it a duel?
I have absolutely no idea.
Duel sounds British.
Okay.
2 men stand in front of a humble frontier cabin in the middle of the empty Missouri landscape. They have their hands on their guns, ready to pull the triggers at a moment's notice, determined to protect their home, their honor, their values. I assume at this point a tumbleweed rolls by.
Yeah, of course, it has to.
Thank you. And then a short distance away, 2 other men stand facing toward the house.
Oh, and then you're going to say 2 other men are starting their own duel?
No, it's 2 men on one side, 2 men on the other side.
Oh, okay, got it.
And I just assume they have mean scowls on their faces.
Yeah, got to.
They're ex-Confederates. And they've come here to teach these Union scum a lesson because they might have lost the war. They still had a lot of fight left in them, unfortunately. The 2 men protecting their home look knowingly at each other. The rebels have brought their guns too, and you cut the tension with a knife. Then a shot rings through the air, quickly followed by another, no one knowing who shot first. And when the dust settles, 1 man is dead. I'm Karyn Harding.
And I'm Kim McMasters.
And this is Low Ancestry. Welcome back, Kim.
Welcome, Karyn.
We don't often start with like personal anecdotes, but we're feeling crazy.
Yeah.
Because we had a kickball tournament today. And we expected to get out in the first round.
We sure did.
And we did not.
Played 3 games.
We played 3 games. I'm so sore.
Yeah.
I'm tired.
Yeah.
Probably dehydrated.
Yeah.
We didn't eat for hours.
I felt like I was going to yarf in the car on the way home. And maybe it should be acknowledged that we skipped last episode because you had
the plague.
And you're feeling better?
Yes, but I'm still, you know what sucks? Having asthma, everything.
Yes.
But now, especially as I get older, when I get sick, it always goes into my chest and my asthma like holds on to it.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to probably sound like out of breath the whole time. Just like, is she smoking? Is she vaping? Like, what's she about?
And
she
like, yes, but that's not the main issue.
But the main issue is the mucus in my lungs.
She's not smoking or vaping.
We're all doing good. None of us have cried this weekend.
No, I haven't.
Because the last time we did this too, we were doing high ancestry.
Yes, which was a very different vibe.
Totally different vibe.
And thank you all for listening.
I'm pretty excited to be back on our BS.
You've been teasing this. If I think this is what it is.
Yes, it is.
Reverse that. Then you've been teasing this for quite a bit.
It is eventful. It's pretty cool.
There's already been a shootout.
The first line I have written here is, I have one of the most eventful stories that we've ever had on the podcast.
Oh!
So topics include America's fraught Western expansion, post-Civil War rivalries, a gentleman's duel, mudslinging politics, and murder. Murder. And all of these come to us courtesy of the Wix family of Pleasant Gap, Missouri. And this will be a 2-part episode because there was just too much to put into one. Kim, is the Wix family name familiar to you?
I think so.
Is Missouri familiar to you?
Yes.
Do you want to say more about that?
My grandmother grew up there.
I think that's right.
I actually never saw where she grew up, I don't think. And Wix sounds familiar, but I can't remember much. Great grandma Wix, maybe, is that?
So yeah, your great grandmother's maiden name was Wix.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. And that's Wix in case you're wondering. So this is your great grandmother on your mom's side, her maternal grandparents. And up until your grandmother moved out of the area, your family has been a fixture in Missouri for a few generations. And the Wixes have been busy making history over there. And I have a little word of advice before we dive into these stories today, because of the emotional journey that I was taken on writing it.
Oh.
I would encourage us not to make quick, character judgments about today's individuals.
Then why am I here?
That's true. That's your whole job.
That's my whole job.
Yeah, I guess do what you want and know that you might be wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay.
That's just life.
Okay.
That's good.
Hey,
that's good advice for everyone.
That's good advice for everybody.
Today's individuals are mired in a lot of complex personalities and ideologies. Most of these guys are making large swings in like all kinds of political directions. So, no snap judgments.
Okay.
But to get to that complicated history, we're going to actually start in Tennessee in 1820, where the only 10 I see is Joseph Wix. I just came up with that.
Super good.
Thank you. No, Joseph Wix is born in 1820 in the backwoods of Tennessee. He's your third great-grandfather.
Okay.
Kim.
Yes.
Would you like to know what else is happening in 1820?
This is my favorite part.
It was a busy year, so hang tight. I've got like 7 bullet points. I know, crazy. It was a leap year, in case that matters.
That's big news.
We always end up talking about Joseph Smith.
Why?
I don't know. He just comes up a lot. He supposedly got his first vision in 1820. So do with that what you will.
Of the golden plates?
I don't know. I think that was a different vision.
Oh,
Kim, don't be ridiculous.
So sorry.
There was a terrible fire in Guangzhou that decimated 15,000 houses.
Oh.
And there was also a terrible fire in France. And Mount Rainier exploded, where modern-day Seattle would be.
Whoa.
The Venus de Milo statue is discovered on an island in Greece just by a regular dude going about his business.
Wait, discovered?
I think he just like came across it.
Where was it?
On an island.
Just loose?
I think just loose.
Whoa.
My guess is it was probably on a ship that like crashed.
Yeah.
And then the UK has its last judicial decapitation ever. And the Regency era officially ends on this year. And those things are not related, but I felt like they should be.
Mm-hmm.
Susan B. Anthony is born.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, she's not a direct ancestor of mine, but there's like an offshoot where she is one of my ancestors.
Cool.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
And then lastly, the Missouri Compromise is signed. And that's where we come in.
Mm-hmm.
A little insight on the Missouri Compromise.
If you asked me what it was, which I was expecting you to do, couldn't tell you.
I didn't want to do that to you.
Okay.
Do you want me to ask you?
No, thanks.
The divide in political parties in the U.S. was starting to get split down the lines of how people felt about slavery around like 1820. Mm-hmm. And there was a pretty even like representation from the existing states that were in the Senate, with a slight majority for the northern free states without slavery. And then Missouri comes along wanting to be a state. And everyone's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. If Missouri is admitted as a free state with no slavery, then the southern slave states would be truly outnumbered, political power extinguished. And that was untenable. So, and vice versa, the free states were like, we don't want Missouri to be a slave state so that they gain power either. So there was kind of like a standoff. If we invite Missouri into the Senate, like, what is that going to do to us? So in the end, they do decide to make Missouri a state, but they also make Maine a state at the same time.
Oh.
So Maine would be a free state, Missouri would be a slave state, and everyone's political power remained the same, and that was called the Missouri Compromise.
Okay.
So we're going to get into a lot of complex Missouri politics later in this episode. Look forward to it. So I felt like this was useful to color like the beginnings of Missouri as kind of a contentious place in between political opinions.
Yeah.
Think about it.
I don't know why my brain was like, well, how can you say that Missouri even exists if it's not a state yet? Which is a crazy thing.
Things have names. Are you going to tell that to Puerto Rico? I felt like Z-Way.
That was so Z-Way coded. Yeah, I don't know why my brain was like, well, wait a minute. How do they know what
Things
Missouri...
don't exist unless you're an American state,
How
Canada.
How do they know what Missouri is if it's not defined by the state police?
Missouri pops out behind a column.
Uh-oh. It's me. It's, hey, guys.
Generally, when we look at white families at this time that are not living in the original 13 colonies, we know that they have not been there long. They're families that have recently migrated from the colonies or from Western European countries. But I actually don't know where Joseph's family came from before they were in Tennessee. I can't go back further than that.
Oh, I wonder if my mom knows.
There's other people online who have put like one other person, and I think they guess North Carolina. I personally have not seen concrete proof of that, but migratory patterns would suggest that makes a lot of sense. What I do know is that when Joseph was 15 in 1835, his family moved from Tennessee to Illinois. But shortly after they arrived, Joseph's father dies. And one telling of the story says that he died of cholera. So at 16, Joseph takes off on his own, and he just goes west, just making his way downtown. And at first, he gets a job making rails for the railroad. That was at 25 cents per 100 rails made. But then Joseph gets a different job driving cattle in Bates County, Missouri. And one of those drives in 1839, he meets some other cattle salesmen who tell him that they had just come from another area in the county where the land is very beautiful.
Sure.
And Joseph is like, I'm looking for a beautiful place to settle down. I'm a cattle driving teen in need of roots. And he goes and he checks it out. When he gets to the area that the cattleman told him about, he is alarmed to find a group of indigenous people there in their homeland. Yeah. Crazy. And in a biographical sketch of the Wix family, there's this like horrifyingly racist description of why Joseph Wix was terrified to make a home where he had seen these native people just like living their lives. So no surprise here, but this biographical sketch does not include what tribe Joseph saw or what land he was trespassing on. I did my best to figure it out, but I'll explain in a moment why that's actually a difficult endeavor. So once again, if a native's person information contradicts mine, ignore me completely.
And please tell us and we'll correct ourselves.
And we'll correct it. In the area of Bates County, Missouri, it's historically a Sioux territory, specifically the Osage people.
Oh, okay.
And we know that the Osage people were in Bates County because Missouri's first mission to Christianize the local native people had been in the area since 1821. They were specifically trying to Christianize the Osage people. But the Osage had the last of their land in Missouri taken by the U.S. government in 1825, and they started moving away. By 1836, the Christian mission closes, and that's when Joseph Wix is there.
Got it.
So somewhere between 1839 and 1843, Joseph arrives in this area. And as we know, the Trail of Tears started in 1837, the worst of it in 1839. So we know that legislation that preceded the genocide came as early as 1830. A lot of the Eastern tribes, they've actually started to already make their way to places like Southwest Missouri on their way to get away from the white Western expansion. And if we want to get even more real, some tribes left shortly after the American Revolution for similar reasons and went to that same area in Missouri. Butler, Bates County area at this time had a mix of Delaware, Shawnee, and Iroquois people. They'd already migrated there from a while ago. So the answer to who Joseph Wix was racially profiling is complex and not easily answerable. Regardless, Joseph decides that he had better choose somewhere else. And he heads a little further north to a place known as Pleasant Gap. He doesn't see any indigenous people. And actually, he happens upon an old neighbor from Illinois on the road. And that neighbor helps Joseph find a random spot in Pleasant Gap. And he just starts building a farm.
Whoa.
Isn't that crazy? I wonder if like he kind of knew that his neighbor was like in the area. And that's why he went that direction.
Wow.
But yeah, he just sits down.
That's wild.
Yeah. And
I wonder if people could get away with that now.
Squatting?
Yeah.
I mean, not to actually claim the land. And actually, I'm glad you brought this up because I'm going to be talking a lot about squatting in the frontier West.
Okay.
This is all going to make you so mad because nothing is real and it's all made up. And that could be the title of this episode.
That could be the title of 2025.
Nothing is real and it's all made up.
Nothing is real.
But there are real consequences.
And the points do not matter.
Points don't matter.
The points don't matter.
Joseph finds 8 acres that he's a big fan of. He just starts building.
Big fan of them.
He does this because there was a lot of pro-squatter sentiment in Congress at this time.
And also, it's not squatting, it's theft.
Yeah, but like, squatting.
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 Hashtag squatting. But it's theft.
Correct.
Okay, great.
The Jacksonian Democrats named
Jacksonian?
Yeah.
I didn't know that was a thing.
Named after
Andrew Jackson.
Wow, see?
I know some things.
They pushed for leniency with these white settler squatters.
Of course they did.
And many times already in U.S. history of Western expansion, white families' rights to these lands were retroactively ratified, like after they had already settled there.
Right.
Not everyone in Congress was pro-squatting, though. The ones who were saw it as a huge opportunity to grow their constituent base. So Missouri was a state by this time, as we know. And if your congressman made it so that you were now a legal owner of the land that you stole, you would probably continue to vote for that congressman. So a lot of politics around squatting. But to be honest, it sounds like Joseph didn't get the land for free. The exact words from the newspaper with this story said that he, quote, purchased a squatter's claim of 8 acres, fenced and broken, a cabin and some cooking utensils for $13. So I don't know who got the $13. That's around $440 today. I know.
Oh my God.
So it wasn't even that he like just took the land. There was already like someone's like broken down cabin there. So
8 acres. How much does 8 acres cost
now? Well, where are we buying it? Richmond?
In Missouri?
Well, I don't know Missouri
Okay,
real estate.
We're going to add this to, spoiler alert, our next High Ancestry.
I don't have the marriage record. But one Wix family historian writes that Joseph gets married to a woman named Sarah, and I never know how to pronounce this last name. It's Beatty. Is that Beatty? Beatty? Sarah Beatty. We're going to go with
Beatty.
that. They get married in 1841. Then in 1842, their first child was born. And they have 8 children together, but only 4 make it to adulthood.
Oh.
Sarah dies in May 1857, which is when her last child, Lewis, was born. May 1857. So I'm pretty sure she died with complications.
Yeah.
Life on the frontier is obviously tough. And now Joseph has all of these kids, no wife. He marries again in 1858 to Eliza Ann Malcolm, and that's your 3rd great-grandmother.
Okay.
So when Joseph meets her, her name is Eliza Ann Cox. She's a recent widow, 4 young children from her previous marriage. And then they have their first child in 1860. And then their second child, your great-grandfather, Joseph F. Wix, in 1862.
14 children total?
I think so.
Oh, well, I guess.
I don't have the dates for all of the kids and when they died. But
wow,
if they're alive at that time, it's 8, 12,
4,
14,
14.
And I don't think the house was very big.
Oh boy.
During this time, he built his own brick house with the bricks that he made himself. He tans his own leather. He builds his own loom and weaves material for his family. And then if that wasn't enough, he sometimes served as the teacher in the schoolhouse for the children in the area. Is there nothing he can't do?
He does all the things that women did.
There probably weren't like that many women out there. And with 14 kids, she's got no time.
Yeah, but like women can do all of that.
Yeah.
And like big deal that he can too.
I think it's a really good point. But if you're taking care of 14 kids, are you going to weave on your loom at night?
No, he wasn't taking care of the kids.
So he's got loom time.
Loom time. When Missouri Live tweets, that's her hashtag.
Hashtag loom time. They like think it's so cool that he was a teacher. I don't know what his credentials are. He was like a cattle driver at 16. Like, I don't know what
anyone can be a teacher.
Literally anyone can be anything. Yeah. Take that, teachers. Anyone can do your job.
No, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant.
Joseph is really liked by everyone.
Okay, good.
And he also eventually serves as postmaster for Pleasant Gap when they eventually get a post office. And that kicks off Joseph's political career. And family historians say he served as a justice of the peace for 20 years.
Whoa.
And then he became a judge of Bates County from 1861 to 1863.
Wow.
And then again from 1866 to 1869.
Wow.
So things are good for a pioneer right now, but that pesky Civil War rears its ugly head and affects Missourians in some pretty crazy ways. So Missouri in many ways is a state that encapsulated this like larger conversation of American politics in the decade leading up to the Civil War. As we mentioned at the top of the episode, the Missouri Compromise declared Missouri to be a slave state. And indeed, many white settlers who originally came to Missouri were slaveholding Southerners. But as time goes by, that doesn't exactly remain the case. Like Joseph Wix, many incoming settlers were from pro-abolition states like Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. And St. Louis was increasingly becoming a home for incoming German migrants looking for industrial work, so they skewed pro-abolition and anti-slavery as well. Then in 1854, Kansas and Nebraska want to become states, and they want the right to decide for themselves, not by Congress, whether they'll be slave or free. And they enacted a bill that nullified the policy set down by the Missouri Compromise. What resulted was something of a micro pre-Civil War on the border of Missouri and Kansas between pro-slavery Missourians and anti-slavery Kansasans.
Kansasians.
Kansasans.
Kansan.
So you knock off the S and you put an N on it. So this was between pro-slavery Missourians and anti-slavery Kansans.
Yes.
Not Kansasans. Missed opportunity there.
Kansasan is sick, though.
Missed opportunity.
Yeah.
So by the election of 1860, the one and only Abe Lincoln won, and Missouri becomes this microcosm of the larger countrywide debate. And as such, Missourians vote overwhelmingly for candidates who promise to remain neutral and maintain the status quo. I think because they know that they're on the verge of a lot of stuff going down. But the rest of the country voted divisively for candidates on extreme one side or the other. And in the end, Lincoln won the country. But Missouri elected a supposedly neutral candidate that had Southern leanings to represent them. And while Missourians desired not to secede when the South declared its intentions to do so, their new governor was making secret plans to secede that Missourians didn't know about. That governor never got the chance, though, because when the war starts in 1861, a Union officer has a small skirmish outside of St. Louis against the Missouri governor, wins, and then maintains Missouri's pro-Union status.
Whoa.
So it was a pretty good idea to get in there quick.
Yeah.
Jump in.
Wow.
But despite being a fully Union state officially, Missourians on the ground were still divided, as many settlers had come as slaveholding settlers. And furthermore, the Confederacy declared that they didn't recognize Missouri's ousting of their governor. So Missouri had a symbolic sort of government in exile representation in the new Confederate government. That meant Missouri was technically represented in both the Union and the Confederacy. So while Missouri was technically for the Union and had over 400 Union regiments enlist to fight, there were a large number of self-declared Confederate guerrilla fighters all over Missouri who started their own skirmishes. These guerrilla fighters were colloquially known as bushwhackers.
Oh, yes.
You've heard of the bushwhacker.
I've heard this term.
I feel like bushwhackers is a memory that every teen has from their U.S. history class. Because
Carpetbaggers is another one.
Another one. Yeah.
Because when you're a kid and you hear that, you're like, oh my God. Everything is comedic.
These bushwhackers terrorized Missourians with violence and looting.
Yikes.
And weirdly, Missouri's Union government blamed the local citizens for not doing enough to tamp down the bushwhacker attacks.
Now that's interesting to me.
Victim blaming. So while your average Missourian wasn't fond of the Confederated vigilantes doing violence, the Union government wasn't protecting them.
Cool.
So eventually, after a particularly heinous massacre by the bushwhackers, a Union general, Thomas Ewing Jr., blames Missouri farmers for instigating and supporting the massacre, and he enacts something called Order Number 11. This forces all rural residents on the western Missouri border to leave. basically saying that he doesn't know which residents are pro-Confederate and which are pro-Union, so everybody's got to go.
Whoa.
It's more nuanced than that, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think the general idea was that guerrilla Confederate activity was prompting Union sympathizing with like vigilante retaliation, resulting in like an uncontrollable escalation of violence that didn't really have anything to do with the war. None of those were official battles. It was all just like homegrown violence. So if everyone leaves, the theory is that violence will fizzle. And weirdly, he was right. Violence did fizzle. They literally like just told everyone, get out of your houses and go somewhere else. And they did. So how does Joseph Wix fit into all of this? Bates County is on the western Missouri border where all this is happening. And we know that the war very much impacted him and his family. Wix, by his own personal testimony, states in multiple instances that he is and always was a pro-Union man. And I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that. And we'll get into some of it later. But at the time of the start of the war, Joseph is close to 40 years old, and he doesn't enlist in the army, but his son, John Wix, does, and he enlists in the Union Army, which is one point of evidence in favor of Joseph being Union.
Yeah.
Despite not being in the army, we know that Bates County was front row and center to these guerrilla skirmishes. Less than 20 miles away, the first battle where Black Union soldiers fought in the Civil War, that occurred as they defended the area against bushwhackers. And Butler, the town of Butler, which was the county seat, quite close to Pleasant Gap, that was a place of frequent attacks. Joseph Wix's tombstone claims that he was a member of the Missouri State Militia. So he may have been more involved in these skirmishes, like more than we know. We also have a letter written by the Bates County clerk, as dictated by Joseph himself, as a citizen's claim to the U.S. government, stating, Union soldiers came to his farm and they, quote, did take from my barn not less than 100 bushels of corn, and did also destroy much property. And Joseph claims that the U.S. government owes him money for the Union soldiers doing that. Which, yes. Mm-hmm. Also in the letter, we first learned that Joseph
Wait, for the Union soldiers doing that?
The Union soldiers did that.
Oh.
I know. This is, remember what I said at the top?
Yeah.
Like, no snap judgments.
Everybody's kind of doing bad.
And that's just life.
And that's just life.
That's just humanity, folks. Also in this letter, we first learned that Joseph is opposed to the rebellion and the secessionists because he claims that before the Union soldiers came and took his things, the secessionists had already been there and stole much of his property. And he was like,
so everybody's just being really rude.
It was a horrible time out in Missouri during this time.
It was, like the Wild Wild West. I always kind of thought like, well, because people were just being assholes.
And they were.
But like, I didn't realize that it was this widespread.
Yeah. I think war like gave people more motive. So order number 11 in 1863, when it was given, Joseph Wix and his family are among the families to leave the area. And he moves to a place called Rock Creek, Kansas. And so August 1863 is when the order was given. But it's reported that by December 1863, there is not a single family left in Bates County. They're all gone.
Wow.
During this time, somewhere between 1862 and 1865, Eliza Ann, Joseph's wife, dies. She could have died for any number of reasons. As we know, this area was full of war-related violence. And also, this is mid-19th century in the middle of pioneer country. So she could have died from a hangnail infection, for all we know.
Dysentery.
Yeah. There is a family historian, though, who claims that she was killed by Native Americans. I have no proof of this. Eliza Ann isn't the only family member to die at this time. John Wix, Joseph's son, dies while he's enlisted in the war. I don't know exactly how he died.
Yeah.
We have like multiple different accounts. One of Joseph's other children says that John died like related to like war-related injuries and illness, but we don't know for sure. So when the war ends, order number 11 ends, and families are allowed back to their homes in Missouri, including the Wix family. And according to a later account by his son, Clark Wix, the family returned to their farm on April 10th, 1866, and found that their well and their home were still there. And the family's able to rebuild.
Where did they go while they were gone?
Kansas.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
So the family rebuilds, and I don't just mean the land, because in January 1867, Joseph gets married again, and he marries a Miss Rosanna Dawes. in Bates County.
How do you spell Dawes?
Dawese.
Oh.
Dawes.
Dawes.
Joseph is the worst because she's 23 and he's 47.
No.
This is not the worst age gap we've seen.
No,
it's not my favorite.
The worst was what, 45
Bartley
years?
Corbin. It was like he was like 63 and she was like 23. Yeah, it was something insane. It's not my favorite.
Mm-mm.
They have 8 children together. But again, only 4 make it to adulthood.
Dang.
He's consistent.
Oh, that's awful.
It's awful. It's a lot
and
of
we
children.
don't know how they die. Yeah, it's like, don't you have enough?
That's too many to keep track of.
That's
like, what
way
am
too
I going to
many to
do?
keep track
And also,
of.
when children die, it wasn't like there were death certificates.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bates County after the war was pretty dismal by most accounts. A journalist visited the area in late 1865, just after the war, and he wrote about the empty houses, the lone chimneys, and heaps of brick just like lying around. And Butler, the county seat, had essentially been burnt to the ground. And all of that devastation left Missourians more violently divided than ever, which became abundantly clear in their politics.
Mm-hmm.
So remember that Missouri is still a state of Union loyalists and rebel secessionists. And the Union loyalists, now the leading political faction after the end of the war, lean toward a political party called the Radical Republicans, or as they were commonly called, just the Radicals. The Radicals were a faction of the dominant Republican Party. And we need to remember that Lincoln was a Republican.
Mm-hmm.
And while the Republican Party was anti-slavery, they maintained a moderate idea of Reconstruction after the Civil War. Like, as a general rule, they were like, we're anti-slavery, but we're not going to continue punishing the Southerners.
Right.
So they wanted a British model of abolishing slavery, which was to monetarily compensate slave owners for losing their slaves. And they wanted to reinstitute rebels as voting citizens of the U.S., which is how the British did it. Or the British didn't have rebels.
Mm-hmm. Wait, they wanted to reinstate rebels.
So basically, like, we know that you're rebels.
Yeah.
But, like, we'll let you vote. You're citizens.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah. This is so interesting because in Star Wars, the rebels are the good ones.
I know. It's like you really have to, like, figure it out.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's weird.
Uh-huh.
But conservative Republicans at this time, they, while they were, pro all of this stuff, they were opposed to civil rights and like the suffrage of Black people. So it was like, we really want to free them. Slavery is bad, but like, that's it.
Yeah. Okay. So then what?
Well, radical Republicans, on the other hand, were some of the first who supported the full enfranchisement of Black people. And their policies moved to give them the same rights and opportunities as white people, like immediately after the war. That's what they wanted. And they also believed that any secessionist should lose all of their rights and could not vote or hold office.
Whoa.
And while radical Republicans were only a small subset of the Republican Party, they were the majority of all political parties in Missouri. So Missouri, like, I mean, I think just Missouri just like swings hard.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
So as a side note, it would be really satisfying to wholeheartedly root for the radical Republicans. But like I said.
But back then.
Like I said, we can't make snap judgments about anything.
I loved their first album, though.
I know, but their sophomore work.
That joke's never going to get old to me.
It's worth noting that all political parties have a couple of beefers in regards to policy. For one, they were deeply nativist, which meant that they were the 19th century equivalent of America First. So they weren't very fond of immigrants, despite all of their immigrant origins and like the large German population.
Yeah.
And they were also known to be very anti-Catholic, which can be reasonably tied to their anti-immigrant sentiments. So radical Republicans were doing a lot of good stuff, but then they were like America First. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Bummer.
Anyway, radical Republicans overwhelmingly won in the elections of Missouri after the war. And
wow.
While at a federal level, the country had elected a Southern Democrat with Southern sympathies for president after Lincoln's assassination, Missouri lawmakers enacted an, quote, ironclad oath for their citizens, which meant that every citizen, in order to vote in Missouri or hold public office or get any kind of professional license like a doctor or lawyer, they had to wholly prove that they did not participate in any of the 86 acts of rebellion during the war.
Whoa.
Those acts being like fighting for the rebels, providing them with supplies or information, or even generally just like feeling okay about them. That? I mean, you don't.
Yeah.
I mean, for fighting, there's records, but I think for the most part, they were just like, you are going to say that you didn't do any of this and you like, not recuse. What's the word?
Oh, renounce.
Renounce. That's it.
That deserves a good long exhale.
This ironclad oath policy actually reignited violence and guerrilla warfare in Missouri, where rebel secessionist Democrat sympathizers began to fight against the Union establishment.
Can you say that string of words one more time?
Rebel secessionist Democrat sympathizers.
Wow. That's complex.
Thank you. I'm a really good writer.
No, I just mean
it's
like
evocative, paints a picture.
Yeah, you did that.
So the most famous of these rebel like guerrilla fighters is, I think you can guess this.
Don't make me.
Think of one of the most famous outlaws of all time. What were you going to say? Like Lil Nas X or something crazy?
No. The first name that came to mind, John Wayne.
Notorious real outlaw John Wayne.
Everything that's coming to me is like characters, like Westworld.
Yeah.
I was like Anthony Hopkins.
Yes, Anthony Hopkins.
Or like Red Dead Redemption 2.
Oh, Kim, you're killing me.
I'm going to die when you tell me.
You are going to die. Jesse James.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I couldn't have pulled that out, but yes.
But you know, he's like one of the most famous of all time.
The one.
He was an ex-bushwhacker.
Cool.
And he had Southern sympathies. And he took, along with others like him, the radical Republican takeover of Missouri as an invitation to start just like madness. So he was robbing banks and stagecoaches, just believing that he was like fighting against the institution. Like I said, he wasn't the only one. There were a lot of ex-Confederates doing crimes during this time, and Unionist vigilantes would often retaliate violently. Tensions were extremely high, and in some cases, radical Republicans would bar known Democrats from voting by gunpoint. So in another case, a prominent radical Republican politician was even murdered by the KKK, who were obviously Southern Democrats.
Whoa.
So this was like pretty serious.
Dang.
And the reason I'm harping on all of this post-war tension is because it came right to Joseph Wix's front yard in 1868.
Ooh. And he's how old now? 48?
He was born in 1820. Yeah. Yeah, math. See? Great.
Listen, you got numbers? I'm your girl.
Yeah. In a newspaper recounting of the incident, they state that, quote, old grudges existed between some of the Union boys and Rebs of the Pleasant Gap. So best I can tell, ex-rebels threatened to whip a Union boy. And that was the wording, whip a Union boy. So that could just mean like whip him into shape. Like,
yeah.
Or maybe they brought a whip.
Could it have been like a black Union soldier?
No, I think they were related to the Wixes, if I remember correctly.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah. Well, they heard this threat apropos of nothing.
Yeah.
And in response, they all scheduled a fight. And it was going to be between the rebels and the Unionists. So I think the intent was to be like a fist fight or like a boxing fight, because the newspaper says that they were supposed to follow, quote, prize ring rules.
Oh.
So that was like the intention.
Yeah.
And the rebels who were fighting, they were named Charles Hartman and R.E. Stratton. The Unionists were Joseph Wix and his nephew, Robert Wix. And they met at Wix's farm. And when they got there, both the rebels and the Unionists had their revolvers with them, which I don't think they were supposed to. So they all start arguing. The arguing gets heated. And the claim is that a rebel yelled, shoot, and 4 shots came at both Joseph and his nephew, as well as a local judge who just like happened to be there.
Oh, no.
All of those shots miss. So the Wixes retaliate and shoot back, and 3 bullets hit Charles Hartman, who dies instantly. Stratton runs off.
Oh.
So Joseph and Robert are fine, except that Robert has a burn on his face because apparently Hartman's pistol went off so close to him that the gunpowder burned his cheek.
Oh my God.
So they were like standing close to each other.
Whoa.
Which in my cold open, I said they were far apart because it felt more like a Western shootout.
Yeah.
But I like the idea of them just like him missing that close by.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
That's wild. When we were talking shootout, for some reason I was thinking of shotguns.
Yeah,
That's
I can see why.
revolvers.
Like Western style.
Yeah, Western style.
Also, I forgot this part. Robert had the burn on his cheek and he had 3 holes in his clothes, but he wasn't hit anywhere.
Whoa. Maybe he's just like a rough and tumble, like
and he just
got snagged, got his pants snagged on something.
But as we know, history is written by the victors. So I could definitely see the boys going back to the saloon and being like, oh yeah, burned his cheek and there were 3 holes in his clothes. So, I mean, boys, you know?
You know, it's so wild. I know what you said at the beginning of this episode, and I know how hard we often come down on men in history, but I think because
I'm so concerned where this is going.
No, because Wix has claimed oftentimes to be pro-union, my brain immediately went to like, well, yeah, history is told by the victors, but like these guys have some empathy because they didn't want slaves.
Yeah.
So are they more likely to tell the truth? Which is like so black and white, and it's never that.
Yeah, I think you're not taking what I said at the beginning of this episode at all.
Of course not. But again, why am I here if not to make snap judgments and get history facts wrong?
I think it is both possible to have empathy and to be a murderer. And that's what's happening.
Yeah.
Eventually, Joseph and Robert are charged with murder.
Okay.
And they stand trial in they're charged with it in 1871. So they had like, what is that, 3 years?
Yeah, 3 years of just
no problem.
Yeah.
And then they stand trial in 1872 and 1873. What did Joseph get up to in the meanwhile after the murder and before his trial, you might ask? Well, he was a justice of the peace and he served in multiple local offices and committees conducting political business in the area. Between 1868 and 1871, no grand jury would even indict the Wix boys.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think you can guess that by the time the state of Missouri grabs hold of Joseph and Robert and puts them on trial, at least Joseph was a respectable town leader. And in my opinion, I would have thought that they would get like the respectable town leader treatment in court. But surprisingly, Joseph and Robert asked for the trial to be changed from Bates County to Vernon County on account that the Bates County judge was prejudiced against them in their opinion. And the change in venue was granted.
Wow.
So it sounds like by 1871, the secessionists were getting more political power.
Yeah.
However, I think some consideration may have been about an incident in which one of the Bates County jurors for the original trial in 1872 was kidnapped.
Wait, say that one more time?
So the change of venue might also have been considered because there was an incident in which one of the Bates County jurors was kidnapped during the original trial of 1872.
Whoa.
And then I have written here, ... or was he? His name was Decatur Smith.
Decatur?
Decator.
Decatur.
Decatur.
Well, when you're talking about the place in Georgia, which is similar but with a U, it's Decatur.
Should we just say that then?
I have absolutely no idea.
Who's Decatur? And is the food good?
Did people in Missouri in the 1870s have Southern accents?
I don't know. I mean, Missouri was like in a part where there was like some of that French stuff going on.
That French stuff.
Right, like St. Louis was founded by French people.
I'm so curious about what they would have sounded like.
Yeah. Decatur.
Because like if it's Decatur, that's something.
Yeah.
What's the last name?
Smith. So French. It was probably a blended family.
Decatur Smith.
Yeah. Let's go with Decatur Smith.
Yeah.
Oh, it sounds bad to say.
It all sounds bad. D. Smith.
Yeah. I think they call him Deck. So maybe we could do that.
Okay.
Anyway, Decatur Smith was successfully chosen as one of the jurors for the Wix murder trial, but there are some rumors that Smith is living on Joseph Wix's land and that he's actually a relative of Joseph and he lied about it. So the original story that was told before the general public knew that Smith had lied was that 3 men came to Smith's house at 3 a.m. the night before the trial, pretending to be the sheriff and telling Smith that they would escort him to the courthouse in Butler for the trial. He never made it to the courthouse the next day, though, and he had fully disappeared. The trial went forward with 11 jurors and was a hung jury. So the thought was that Smith was kidnapped by old bushwhackers intent on hanging the jury because I guess it was like generally known that Smith thought Wix was innocent.
Yeah.
So now the real story is garbled in its retelling by the local newspaper. So I'm going to do my best to translate it.
Real quick, hanging the jury means...
A hung jury?
Yeah.
Oh, it means that they're tied and they can't come to an agreement. Or not even tied. They just like can't come to a unanimous
Okay, that's
decision.
right. Because I was thinking to myself, like, it's not like there has to be one side because then it would be 5 and 6. And then, right. Okay. Yeah.
It just like they couldn't come to a decision.
Got it.
The newspaper tries to tell the real story. I'm going to do my best to translate.
Okay.
Smith turns up on the day of the trial at some random guy's house with a harrowing tale. He says the part about the 3 rebels taking him from the house, but then he says that on the way to the courthouse, 12 KKK guys in disguise grab Smith from the 3 guys that took him from the house, and they take him toward Henry County, and then they stop and tell Smith that he could choose to leave the state or be hung. So he chose to leave, but then came back and showed up at some guy's house with this story. Yeah. But the newspaper reporting this is a Democrat newspaper.
Oh.
And I think that they're insinuating, like throughout the piece, that Smith was actually taken by 3 men who were supposed to be there to investigate him for perjury because he lied about being related to Joseph Wix.
Okay.
And they're saying that Deck's story about the KKK was all made up as a way of making an excuse for leaving the state so as not to be indicted for perjury. It's all very convoluted.
Oh, who do you believe?
I don't think that Decatur Smith was kidnapped. Okay. I think it is more likely that he was going to be indicted.
Yeah.
Wow. So I don't know if he actually does leave the state when he says all this, but when he comes back to Bates County, he just lives there the rest of his life and doesn't leave. So he seems fine.
Yeah.
But we can't leave the story about Decatur Smith just yet because, Kim, I need you to read the beginning of the article that writes this story.
Okay.
And this newspaper absolutely reads this man to filth. So
Deck is a curious specimen of the genus Homo. He loves a lie, and the truth, he has no use for it. He has told exactly 2,560,481 lies since he came to Butler and is not near through yet. He is decidedly progressive, every falsehood being more silly and preposterous than its predecessor. Whenever he opens the bung hole in the front side of his head, a volume of slanderous, vile, abusive language flows out the maggoty opening as naturally and as easily as Niagara pours over its rocky precipice.
Evocative.
He not only loves villainy in the abstract, but all thieves and villainy personally, and takes delight in giving them all assistance in his power. Now, wait a second.
This is journalism. Give this man a Pulitzer.
Now, wait a second. This sounds like something that would be written on InfoWars. So now I don't believe the newspaper.
Oh, the Republican newspaper was doing the same stuff.
Oh, really?
Oh, 100%.
Wow.
No, we're going to get into it more on part 2. But the Republican newspaper and the Democrat newspaper were absolute animals.
We love a newspaper feud.
We do.
We do.
I also think there just wasn't like, I mean, there wasn't the same like journalistic integrity, I think, at this time. Not that they were like trying not to be integritous, but I think there was just like a lot of room for personal like vibes.
2,560,481 lies.
Honestly, this person, I've read a lot of old newspapers, like
Yeah.
a lot of old newspapers.
Yeah.
This person deserves a Pulitzer. The evocative language,
starting with a curious specimen of the genus Homo is awesome.
it's the way that Niagara flows over the cliffs, it's beautiful.
He not only loves villainy in the abstract, but all thieves and villainy personally.
Not just the abstract.
That's honestly this slays.
I'm just gonna get this tattooed. This
is one of the best things you've ever had me read.
You're welcome. On to the Wix boys.
Okay.
The jury was hung, and the judge didn't like the Wixes, allegedly.
Yeah.
So they get the new trial and the new location.
Mm-hmm.
The new trial location worked out. The prosecution couldn't locate most of the witnesses, and the ones that they did find mostly testified that Joseph and Robert nary did touch their pistols and were the picture of peace and de-escalation until Charles Hartman pulled his pistol and shot at them. And then, of course, in self-defense, Joseph and Robert had to pull their weapons on him. Sure. And that might be a true representation. Mm-hmm. The jury certainly thought so and found the defendants not guilty of murder and declared their actions self-defense.
Wow.
Joseph is now in his 50s.
Yeah.
He's only getting older.
Yeah.
Still having children.
Moving on to a 24-year-old.
Yeah, 19.
Ugh.
In an interview with Joseph in 1882, he says that due to his failing health, he moved to Washington State in 1880.
Oh.
So the birth of his son, B.M. Wix, proves that he's in a place near Spokane called Hangman Creek, also known as Lata Creek. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
Okay.
But weirdly enough, in the 1880 federal census, him and his family are in Laramie, Wyoming, and there's no explanation.
Oh.
So Joseph has a weird post-trial retirement that I don't understand. Something's happening.
Got it.
But by 1881, he just comes back.
Yeah.
And he's back in Bates County, and I don't know why.
Okay.
And he becomes judge again.
Wow. And he's 61.
He just took a gap year, I guess.
Yeah.
And then came back. He's now a judge, and then he becomes too old and he resigns.
He needed to go on sabbatical.
Exactly.
He's an earth tourist, and he needed to go on a little trip.
In 1895, he passes away after a bout with the flu. And his obituary says this about a complicated man like Joseph.
To say that Judge Wix had no faults would be to claim the infallibility of man. Let us remember that nature is not all sunshine. There was much in his life to emulate. He was plain of speech. He never beat around the bush, in quotes. He rebuked indolence and deception.
Not like Decatur.
Not like old Decatur. He placed a high value on industry and frugality. Yes. To gain his confidence, one must be straightforward. He was brave and self-reliant, a man of iron will. When his conscience told him he was right, there was no compromise. I like this.
No compromise, as in murder.
Well, but was he right? I mean, not to do the murder, but to, about not having.
You heard it here first, folks. Murder is right sometimes.
No. But it sounds.
Yeah.
So far, maybe some good morals.
I think he could. But again, things are complicated. He stole land from Native people.
Oh, sure, yes.
He married a 23-year-old at 47.
The difference in, or the cognitive dissonance of stealing land from Native people and then being pro-union, anti-slavery is really interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, I don't think I mentioned it outright, but there are articles basically just saying outright that Joseph and a lot of his children are radical Republicans. That's their affiliation.
Wow.
So they're even on the furthest progressive end of the spectrum. Aww. So somebody's got to be salvageable.
Yeah, I mean, of all the people that we've talked about in my family so far, it's just nice to know that someone had at least something right.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
What I do like is that they start out with, to say that Judge Wix had no faults would be to claim the infallibility of man, which I think is their fancy way of saying, so he was on trial for murder.
So he was a gabron. Jabron? Gabron.
He was a jabron.
He was a jabron. So he was a schmutz.
Who among us? Who among us? I love that they did that.
Yeah.
These Bates County newspapers
Yeah.
go hard. The article goes on to talk about his work in politics as a public servant, and it states that he only ever had 6 months of schooling in his life, which I think is funny because he was a teacher and a judge for so long. Oh, I also have written here that in total he had 18 children over the course of his life, which is too many.
That's too many.
So tell that to the Duggars. And that, Kim, is the life of Joseph Wix.
I liked it.
Yeah, and like I said,
not a perfect man.
Not a perfect man, but also we're going to learn more about his family in part 2, and we're going to talk about 2 of his sons. History. Oh my God.
History. Oh my God.
I wish I could marry
well,
history.
I do like it's funny to me how many things that you've mentioned kind of like popped back. Like we were talking about bushwhackers.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, I've heard of this. I studied this, but like the takeaways that I had were not at all.
If
what
I
I'm
asked you what a bushwhacker was, you wouldn't have
absolutely no
tell me
idea.
anything.
Could not tell you. Certainly not. So it's nice to revisit it with an adult lens.
My resonance is pretty squarely about Missouri politics and how it fits within the country's politics around the time of the Civil War. Like I said, got pretty obsessed with the topic, in no small part to how it mirrors our modern politics and the way that our two-party system has cycled through its ideologies. And I don't want to give too much away because in part 2 of this episode, we actually will dive into the evolution of the Republican and Democratic parties. But I definitely didn't have a lot of background on the nuances of the two parties during the Civil War. I had known that Republicans were the abolitionist party and Democrats were the secessionists in the South. But I didn't know anything about the factions within the Republican, like anti-slavery ideology, the radicals. And I think my preconceived notion was that the general sentiment of the country post-Civil War amongst the non-South was that they were on board, all of them, with the enfranchisement of Black people. That like, because they were anti-slavery, all of them were going to be like, good to go, all Black people deserve everything now. But it turns out that the moderates in control of federal government were not about that. And I think the thing that struck me about the radicals is, number one, that they called themselves radicals very proudly, which gives me insight into why the evolution of the term has become so pejorative in the modern day political discourse.
Yep.
And then secondly, the thing that they were radical about was something that was morally very unradical. They believed that freed slaves and indeed all Black people and all Americans should have equal rights. Radical.
Crazy.
And while to this day, many folks still do not have equal opportunities and equal rights, the general consensus is that equality as a concept is not radical. Not to the administration, obviously, but I think your average person would say that that's the ideal. But back then, the ones who believed in equality were, as I said, radical. And obviously we can't forget that part of their radicalness was that they wanted to punish the rebels and the slave owners, but also like, yeah, I'm down with that reasoning. There are a couple of things that give me hope. And then there are a couple of things that make me sad. The things that give me hope is that there were places in the country, like Missouri, that were radical. While the rest of the country voted in like a Southern sympathizer president who vetoed bills giving Black people rights, Missourians voted in the most radical politicians they had. And I think that remembering that there are pockets of people willing to fight for others within a country that doesn't have those values is a hopeful thought. And even more hopefully, things that are considered radical in the present, by which I mean ideologies that advocate for human dignity, which are rejected by the majority, there is every hope that those ideas will not be radical in 100 years from now. And even if we don't see that come to fruition in our lifetime, and indeed we may not, I do think that the hope is worth fighting for. But the thing that makes me sad is that the radicals just petered out in the 1870s. They mostly conformed to moderate politics. And in the next episode, we'll see how that kind of apathy is devastating. And we will see through the lives of Joseph's children the swing from radical policy all the way to like defending horrible institutions.
Oh, man.
So anyway, Kim, any resonance from you?
I was thinking about that too, that I didn't realize like how many different sort of levels of being pro-union there were. And it is so interesting to me how it sort of had to be like, well, it's one or the other. It's all or nothing. So like the only option is to go with the one that's less bad, you know? And it's just wild that that's like still the case a little bit. Like being, you know, voting for someone who's like, we don't need slavery, but, you know, don't give them human rights is still better than like, no, we should have slaves. And that's a complicated thing to understand, feel, and vote for.
That is so apropos of the moment, though.
Yes.
Right? Because I think I think Democrats right now and leftists right now are having this conversation
100%
of like, we need to be cognizant that not everyone is going to have the same bullet points. But if we're moving the needle forward in any way possible, there is value to that.
There were a lot of discussions that you and I had, that we had with our friends, that I've had with my family about, you know, voting for the lesser evil and how disappointing it feels to know that the person that you're voting for is still enacting policy that is harmful to so many people.
Yeah.
But also, there are a lot of people with a lot of privilege that would rather have what is comfortable, and they'll be like, well, equal rights for all, but as long as it doesn't like encroach on my property or my comfort or my privilege or my, you know, my assets. And that's obviously still kind of the case here. It's like no slavery, but like don't try and get power.
Yeah.
You know, like don't try to be as rich as me.
That's
or whatever.
uncomfy. Yeah.
Exactly. So that it's so the same.
Yeah.
It's so the same, which is really pretty crazy.
I think it's very similar to, it feels even more mirrored. Feels even more mirrored.
Yeah.
When talking about illegal immigrants, because the center very devoutly will still say, we don't want illegal immigrants, get them out of here. But like, we don't want to be mean to them.
Right. Or like, you know, if you want to come here, just do it legally.
Yeah. And it's like,
as if the law isn't made up.
Which erases the nuance of everything.
Yes. Of being a refugee, of seeking sanctuary. You're missing the plot. You're missing? You're losing the plot.
And missing it.
You're missing it also. Pay attention to the movie.
That's one of the other conversations that Democrats are having. They're like, they feel like they lost the election because they weren't as hard on immigration. So they're watching Republicans do the cruelest possible stuff and going, we're not cruel, but we'll kick them out too. Yeah. And that is so far from what I would want to see happen. What I want to see is what we've learned here about the radical Republicans gain power in pockets of this country, which we've seen here in Richmond happen. I think that we should be leaning in to what makes us the opposition. And I think that people will respond to that.
Glad we both had the same resonance there.
Yeah.
Just this interest in the divisiveness of the country and how it's always sort of been like, it's one or the other. It's either or. Yeah. Very black and white. The other thing, just to bring it back a little bit, is just feeling a little bit of regret for not having like talked to my grandmother about her life more. Growing up in Missouri.
She probably knew a lot of this.
She definitely did. I loved my grandmother, and she loved her grandkids, like lived for them and told really great stories, but was also like genuinely interested in the stories we had to tell. But because at the time when I was younger, I was like, this is not for me. Like, I wasn't so concerned with like the history of it all. And I wish we could have had conversations like this. Both my grandparents on my mom's side have passed, and they, I think, would hate to see what's happening to the country right now, but I also think we would have really interesting conversations together, and that makes me just sad that I can't do that with them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I am kind of wondering, like, maybe this is a complicated thing to feel. When we talked about Joseph Gillette, I expressed some, like, disappointment with not having a close enough relationship with my family on my dad's side to be able to talk about this kind of thing really, really openly. Yeah, it is interesting how much more interested I am in this side of it. A, because like I relate to people who are anti-slavery.
Yeah.
And B, because I just had like a different relationship with that side of the family, with my mom's side of the family. So there's a little bit of bias in there, but it's also just really interesting, this part. Like you kept teasing this episode and you were like, I think you're going to really like it. I was like, okay. But I genuinely am interested in it.
Because I'm a good storyteller.
You are. Well, I like to think of Missouri as like the sort of, what do they call that? Like the litmus test kind of the country?
Microcosm.
Yeah. But also like a litmus test.
Oh, yeah. Working a little
I don't know, both. The litmus cosm.
New band name. No, where were you going?
Like
Litmus. Where are you going with that?
Well, it's just it's fun. It's interesting.
Yeah.
To think about a newer state jumping in at that time and then having to figure out like where it's going, what it's doing, how it's going to be.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
It really is.
Yeah. And we don't get to do that because we've got history, baby.
I genuinely think that I feel like Missourians are going to get such a big head over this, but I genuinely think
the Missourians who are listening.
Emma probably.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Missouri ended up being this like state with some of the craziest, like most interesting history that tells the story of like what America was like in these very interesting ways, more than I ever realized. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't expect to come out of this being like, wow, Missouri is really interesting.
Yeah.
I don't want to live there. But crazy.
Yeah. And Missouri is a state right now, like I haven't spent much time there. And I think there's sort of an overwhelming sense of like coastal elitism. Like if you live on the coast, you don't have a lot of familiarity with like the more western middle part of the country. And growing up in Virginia, like Virginia has such a concrete identity as like a historical state. So it is so interesting to be like kind of checking my preconceived notions about what Missouri is today. Like, oh, I guess I don't know how they got here or like what even they are like as a state right now. I really don't. So it's making me go, huh. And if that's the best we get for our listeners, then that's great. Just like, think about it. We have to get out of here. Just real quick, thank you all for listening to High Ancestry. If you don't know already, we are working on a Patreon. We're going to put out a new episode soon. So go check it out. Subscribe if you are interested. And like, aren't you? Thanks.
We have to leave.
Okay, we're done. Thank you.
Bye, Kim.
Bye. Low Ancestry is written and produced by Karyn Harding and co-hosted by me, Kim McMasters, with original music and audio engineering by Benjamin Malk. Original cover art was designed by Christina Swanson of Swansong Creative. Resources pertaining to today's episode and a link to the official bibliography can be found in our show notes or at our website, lowancestry.com. All research was conducted by Karyn, but she's been known to be wrong on occasion. So if you'd like to connect with Karyn or even send her a correction, you can email us at connect@lowancestry.com or find us on Instagram @lowancestry. Genealogy is, after all, a community effort. Thank you so much for listening, and if you like what you hear, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love to hear from you, and frankly, we really need this.